about 6 hours door to door.
Gotcha.
How are
Hello.
you?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes.
Sorry about that. I was in the other room wrapping up with kiddos. How are we doing
Oh,
this evening slash morning, depending on where we're at?
it's probably quite early for Dan. And I don't know if you can see my screen. I'm driving home right now, so we're at different points on the clock right now.
Well, just be safe, Michelle. I want to make sure that you stay okay
Yep.
driving through.
Yeah, be safe. Don't look at us too much.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Dan, is that right? It's 5 a.m. for you right now?
Yeah, it's 5 a.m.
Okay, we can try to work on some later meeting times in the future so you don't have to wake up at the crack of dawn either. Yeah.
Well, that's whatever. That's fine. Thank you so much.
Okay. And Megan, you're in the Eastern time zone, right?
Usually, I'm on a deputation trip right now in BC.
Okay,
Just
so West Coast. Okay. Well, quick introduction. I feel like I didn't do a very good job of that yesterday. I am Dr. Julie Waltell, and I'm your professor for this particular course. Megan, you and I have met, I think, at the retreat, not last year, maybe the year before.
we might have, if you were there last year, we would have met then as well. But
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
sure the year
I
before.
was. Yeah.
I
I
think we
remember
chatted a little bit because you're from Quebec
from,
and you
yeah.
speak French as well?
Yep, French is my first language.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very cool. And Dan, were you at the retreat last year?
Yes, I
Yeah,
was.
I was thinking I met you as well. How about you, Michelle?
Yeah, I was there last year as well.
Okay.
I don't recall meeting you. I think I recall someone pointing out that you were a quantitative expert, but I don't think we interacted.
Those are some big words. I don't know if I like that. Expert seems loaded. Well, really, the purpose of these kind of office hours meeting, I'm a little bit old school. I know this is an online program, but I really like face-to-face time. And for some cohorts, it works better to do a one-on-one on phone calls or FaceTime calls. But the last several cohorts, probably the last 3 years, these group meetings work a little bit better. It seems like you guys are more gelled as a group. And then there's some benefit to like if a student asks a question, others benefit from that. The wheels get rolling, and then having it recorded just allows us to share with everyone. So I've started doing that, and that's been pretty helpful. And this is not mandatory, so I want to make that clear too. This is not a point earner, and I'm not like, well, they never showed up to office hours, so like these subjective points somehow they don't get. It's not like that at all. It's just an opportunity for us to see each other face to face and for you guys to ask any questions you may have about the course, clarifications, expectations, things like that. And I have found that there's some benefit to meeting every other week. Usually it's right around the time where a data analysis assignment is due, and that's usually when there's the most questions. And then it paces us also with the paper so that no one is we're not getting to week 4 and it's the first time we've seen each other and, then there's a paper due and everyone's kind of freaking out. So that's the pace that I like. But having said that, there's definitely no obligation. And if you guys are not able to make it that week, I know everyone's super busy. That's why we record it and I'll just post it on the YouTube channel and you guys can watch it at your leisure. So, um, sound good? Does that sound
Yeah,
okay?
thank you so much.
Okay. So I guess the two things I was hoping to discuss today that I talked with some of the students yesterday was paper expectations and then data analysis assignment. I think those are the big ones for this week. So I've replied to many of you in terms of your research topic, and I think we can certainly spend some time talking about it in here, but that is massaging a topic and discussing variable. I find there's a little bit more benefit in doing that one-on-one. So I'm opening that up for all of you guys if you want to talk further one-on-one about your specific topic. But broadly, the goal of the paper, and it's shifted over the years because I've taught this class for so long. It used to be people submitted their candidacy paper. And then we kind of took the candidacy and massaged it into kind of a quantitative question and created hypotheses. That was good and bad. Good for those who are like, yes, this is going to be my dissertation topic, and I am leaning towards a quantitative dissertation. And so then it was a really meaningful piece of work. But I would say that was a minority of students, like maybe 10%. This is really more qualitative heavy kind of degree. And so for many, it just felt like sticking, a square peg in a round hole. Like, how am I doing this? So I've kind of moved away from the full candidacy. Plus, some of you guys may be so sick of that topic and you don't want to do it anymore. I want there to be some space for that too. So the goal now is to create an introduction on a topic of your interest, which can be what you studied for candidacy and it can be what you want it to be for dissertation. But the idea is that you are looking at two variables and seeing how they relate to one another. Okay. So by looking at the literature and finding articles that speak to each of those, you are then going to write a quick introduction. So really no more than a page introducing the idea, the topic, the variables you're interested in. And then you will do an annotated bibliography for 8 to 10 articles discussing their findings and how that further the specific variable or topic you're interested in. And I'm super abstract right now. I'll give you guys an example in just 1 second. And then it culminates with your hypotheses. So that, in other words, you are walking a reader through your rationale as to how two variables relate to one another. So an example would be, let's say, pastoral leadership ability. And I'm interested in that. Like, what makes a pastor a good leader of a church? And this is a different example I used yesterday. So you guys can always go back to the other video if you want a slightly different one. But pastoral leadership skills, and how does that relate to personality traits like extroversion, right? So then I could talk about leadership skills, right? That would be one of the variables. What does it look like to be a leader? How do we define that? How do we define an effective spiritual leader? How does that differ from business leaders? Where's the overlap in that? And what does the literature tell me about that? Through studies that can be quantitative, but can also be qualitative. So don't limit yourself to just quantitative studies. But what does the literature say specifically about spiritual leaders? And then what does the literature say, let's say, about psychological research on personality factors and how well that lends itself to leadership roles, right? So those would be the two variables. And the job that we're doing through this quantitative study, which again, we're not running, this is like a mock proposal, would be what is the relationship between the two, right? How do they relate? Do we find, this would be a correlational study, do we find that leadership skills tend to be higher or more advanced or more effective in leaders who are extroverted, for instance? If I took like a neo PIR, like the extroversion, neuroticism, that kind of scale, would I see a high conscientiousness be seen as a high leader? Like, where is that overlap specifically to spiritual leaders? So then the goal of the paper is to utilize those articles to really buttress your argument that'll lead into your hypothesis of what you think the relationship would be. Okay, so that is what's going to be due at the end of week 4. So it's that intro, the annotated bibliography, and then writing your hypothesis. Now, I had this question from students yesterday. They're like, how many hypotheses should we have? Should we like 3 or 5 or, and my philosophy is don't give yourself more work than you need to. And no dissertation should really have more than 2 or 3 hypotheses. So I would say for the purpose of this exercise, no more than 2 or 3. So don't make it super hard or tricky. I'll put a little asterisk next to that. If your life's goal is to do a quantitative dissertation and you're like, this is my chance to really pick Dr. Woltel's brain on how to do that, and I really want it to be as close to my proposal, let's go for it. Sure. For the bulk of you, that's not going to be it. And I don't want you guys to spend a ton of time on something that will just be an assignment rather than something that's worthwhile in your doctoral journey. So that's the paper assignment. I think it's this week for reference pages or references. I asked for about 8 to 10. It is quite likely that as you dive in and look through those research articles, they may or may not be good articles by the time you get to week 4. That is a-okay. You may switch around, right? The idea is this is our starting point. and what does that literature look like? And as you read through, you may even find an article within the paper you're reading that is a better fit, and then you go back and add that. There is no correlation between how long this paper is and your grade, right? So you may think this is my chance to write the greatest research paper, 50 pages. Sure. I have seen very, very successful 10-page papers also get A's. So the number of pages not something that should drive you. It should be how effectively are you able to annotate each research article and how does it relate back to the variables you're interested in? And then how well are you able to be to really explain away your hypothesis? So that is the main goal of the paper for week 4. Questions about that? I just did a lot of talking.
Dr. Woltill, is that
Yeah.
how
Uh-huh.
Woltill?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I think my internet's a bit laggy here, but can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. I guess maybe I need to make another time with you because I listened to the video from yesterday and also I'm trying to hear it again. Um, it sounds like if you have two variables they don't have to already have been quantifiably researched together. Is that right?
No, they don't. They can. They can be, but ideally, when you're working towards a research project, you're finding kind of a hole in the literature, right? You're like, this is my unique contribution. That would be the goal for your dissertation is what is unique that you are bringing to the body of literature? What's a niche you've identified that hasn't been explored, right? So it can be that, but because this is an exercise in quantitative thinking, you can also find something that they have shown exists already. Does that
Okay,
make sense?
so yeah, so I guess I'm going to get feedback from you about what I wrote you last week
Yeah.
in the next few days or soon because we're doing this assignment for this weekend.
I think I emailed you back already.
Okay, I didn't see it, but okay, I'll go back and look. Thank you.
And sometimes it is wonky. If you guys emailed me through Sakai and I reply back, it may pop up in Sakai rather than an email. So just double check both places. I know that's been an issue before.
Okay.
But yeah, we can talk further for sure. Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions about that?
You mentioned somewhere that there needed to be um, a lot out there on the topic. Is that
Here's what I always feel a little hesitant with is when someone, and I had this last year, I had a student who was talking about a new way of looking at Jesus's leadership that had never been looked at before. And so then there were no articles for him to reference. That's going to be challenging to come up with an annotated bibliography, right? And so my again, this is me being protective of you guys in terms of your time and resources. I would pick something that is at least known, right? So if you're looking at a leadership theory, there should be a ton of research articles on that. Again, if you're finding a hole in a niche, that's fine. That's going to be where no one has looked at the intersect. That's okay. We're not running this study in real life. We're not gathering data, so we can be a little bit pie in the sky about it, right? But that's why I would lean more towards something that has been studied before so that you are not looking at the literature and going, there's nothing's ever been discussed about that. I think that would be
okay?
really frustrating.
Okay. I'm looking at from your response, which was really helpful, to the assignment last week.
Yeah.
I was like doing kind of a quick search and see if I could find anything on those type variables um, for whether people would be open to welcoming immigrants and what variables might affect that. It's
Yeah.
just I already knew there's very little that looks at a host society. Anyway, it doesn't matter for my topic specifically. We can talk later, but
And so I think that would be my advice. There's a couple of you in this cohort that have topics like this. It would be, you're looking at something very specific. I think it's, and I'm going to get names wrong. I'm so sorry. I think it's Jeremy that is also talking about online education versus on-ground education. He's interested in that. Um, so there may not be a whole lot specifically about that, but then if you take it a level higher and we use some synonyms for what does it mean to want to be on ground. And you talk about community engagement and connectedness, like some of that, there's going to be info on that. So the same with yours. I was like, what makes somebody want to be a host? Well, they show hospitality. What are those people like? So kind of taking it the higher level to find studies on it.
Okay. So it's
So
not that, so you wouldn't consider that necessarily too narrow.
no, especially if you bring it back up. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Cool.
So for week 4, that's what we're going to do. And then the remainder for week 5, 6, and 7, at the end of week 7, you're going to submit kind of that first portion alongside with essentially a chapter 3. So we'll talk about who would we want to recruit? What's the sample size? How would we go about deciding who we would want in our study, right? So for yours, Megan, if you're looking at host nation of immigrants, maybe to have the opportunity to host would be an inclusion criteria that would be important, right? Or someone who has previously hosted. And
Like
that would be
intercultural experience or whatever. Yeah.
exactly, right? Someone who's been in a bubble, that might actually be an exclusion criteria because they don't really meet what we're looking for within that. Michelle, were you talking about potentially women in pastoral leadership? Am I remembering that correctly?
That
Maybe
was one of them. Yeah. And a follow-up question to what you were saying about the annotated bibliography and what kind of articles to select. So for our candidacy paper, Dr. Beard had us essentially look at like literature in A, literature in B, and then our contribution to the literature was some kind of synthesis of those two different things. But are you saying that for this, we should be looking for articles that are already in that space of combining those like two ideas?
You could do that. That would be okay. I suspect there's probably not a ton in that for most of you with your topics because you are kind of bridging together two different ideas. But it's not something that would be wrong. Absolutely. Because it would
Okay.
also be an appropriate dissertation to do a replication study with a different sample, right? So maybe somebody has done a great research article on entrepreneurial leadership and personality traits, and now your contribution is you're looking at pastoral leadership, right? So you're switching a little bit of the script on that. So you're replicating for the
Okay.
all intents and purposes, but picking a new sample. I hope that answered the question.
Gotcha.
What I was going to say earlier is with your topic, let's say with women in pastoral leadership, an exclusion criteria may be men, right? Or women not in pastoral leadership. So those are going to be the sorts of things that we'll develop during week 5 is how do we create and again, we're not doing this, but how do we write about recruitment? How do we write about inclusion and exclusion criteria? And how do we decide about sample of who is matching the participant pool that we need in order to answer our research question. So that'll be one part is participants and recruitment. Another part will be methodology. So what materials are you going to be using? Each of you should select 1 to 2 survey questionnaire that you would hypothetically want to give because in order to do a quant study, we need data and data is through questionnaires and surveys most often. So which ones would you select? And how have they been validated and shown to be reliable within the literature? And then the last portion is your planned statistical analysis. And this is literally like a sentence or two. In order to answer my hypotheses, or in order to confirm or refute my hypotheses, I will do a chi-square test, or I will do a correlational analysis, or I'll do a multiple regression, right? Depending on which direction we go. And then that product that you submit at the end of week 7 is an abbreviated mini proposal that would look like a quant proposal. So the idea is to walk you through that step so you've had a tiny bit of experience doing it so that if that's the path you take, you have some familiarity.
So, Dr. Waltill, I guess just to understand, you're saying when you say a quant proposal, it doesn't have to necessarily be both sides, but at least one side has to be with survey questionnaire, et cetera, or am I
Tell,
misreading?
tell me what you mean by both sides.
Both variables, like,
Ah,
well,
yes. So it could be, let's say, retention rate in college and then some sort of organizational cohesiveness or belongingness scale, right? So in order to the retention rate, that would be a number you'd get from the university, right? You would get a percentage or you would get to know whether they matriculated or not. And then it would be a survey instrument. So it could be that way. Or it could be two surveys measuring each variable. It just kind of depends on your specific study. And we'll have plenty of time to go into that. Does that make sense, Dan?
No, I'm
No.
sorry. Maybe it's too early for me. So, like, if I'm talking about shared leadership and I see a leadership scale about measures of scaled leadership, shared leadership, and then I talk about a conviction about the Holy Spirit,
Yep.
but that could be in a cognitive scale, which I found, or it could be something more theoretical. Can one side be theoretical and the other side be a surveyed quantitative questionnaire, or do both sides have to be surveyed questionnaire type?
Yes, it
Um,
could be either in that sense, because I could even see you having people respond as part of your demographic variable, something that would classify them in one category or the other in their view of the Holy Spirit, right? And so then you're not necessarily giving a questionnaire, it's just a question that categorizes them and then just
okay.
one questionnaire on leadership. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes it a little easier. Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
I was trying to understand how involved each side scale needs to
And
be.
it's hard for me to have absolutes for everything because each project is a little different. I think there's a couple
Sure.
people who are thinking about doing like a pre-post test where you would do some sort of intervention to see how effective the intervention was in shaping a leader, for instance, at which point we would have a leadership scale that we would give before we would do the intervention and then a leadership scale
Yeah.
after, and you would look at the difference. That would be another way to do it. So but that will come week 5, 6, and 7. And again, that section of the paper is small. Usually it's really no more than 4 pages for the remainder of the paper. So the bulk is this annotated bibliography and hypothesis, which kind of really undergirds your entire study. And then the methodology is shorter. And that's actually the same when you do a proposal. The methodology chapter is usually much shorter than the literature review chapter. So, so that's for the paper. Does that
So I'm
help a little
sorry,
bit?
then if
Mhm.
oh, so then
No, go ahead.
if the literature reviews needs to be that much more substantive, are you talking about 10 to 15 pages? Is that what you
Yeah,
mean? Or
usually I've said 10 to 12. Obviously, no one's going to lose sleep if it's 9.5 or 13. You'll also find I am not each professor's a little different. I'm not highly precise with that of like number of words and pay. I've got too many other things going on to care about that. So as long as it feels like you guys gave the project, a good shot, right? Turning in 3 pages might be a little challenging to show breadth of work, but yeah, as long as efforts have been made, that's going to be good. Yeah.
That piece where we're looking for some kind of a scale. What do we do if there isn't one?
Oh, I love that. So it's, I would really, really, I don't want people to be writing their own scale for this class. That's really psychometrics. And even I think that's beyond the scope of a dissertation to write a scale. I mean, it requires so many rounds of validation and recruitment. So we could talk about something adjacent in terms of measurement that is the best we've got so far. Or if you had some sort of, again, like quantifiable way to address it, sometimes like measuring success can be really hard. So if we quantify it by X number of years or having moved up the ladder organizationally a certain number of times, like sometimes there's metrics like that that are not necessarily a survey, but that can also give us a good handle on that idea. It just kind of depends.
Okay.
That's probably not a great answer, Michelle. I think we'll have to just see when we get to it and how we can find something that fits. So that's the paper. The data analysis assignments, the first one is this week. I also shared with everyone a separate video on Jamovi. Um, Jamovi is phenomenal. It is worlds better than Excel in terms of user friendliness. Excel still requires you, I don't know how many of you guys are more familiar with like doing formulas in Excel, you still have to write out the formula and figure out what it is. And then the printout's always kind of it's on a separate page, and um, it just was harder. And then the hardest part for me as an instructor is there are so many versions of Excel. It was very hard to tell people point or click or do this because everyone has something different in front of them. And so and you have to add toolkits oftentimes. So it became challenging. Jamovi is free. It is super close to SPSS, which is really the gold standard for quantitative statistical analyses. And it is, again, it could not be more user friendly. It is literally point, click on the specific descriptive analysis you want. It'll tell you mean, standard deviation, frequency, t-test, all of that. You just click on it and it spits it out for you. And then you can actually copy and paste the tables or graphs that it gives you and bring them right away into a Word document, which is something else that Excel can be a little wackadoo with at times. So the goal for this week is to take a look. There's a Word document that asks you to do certain analyses with the data set I provided. The data set is in Excel, but you open it through Jamovi, and it's pretty basic analyses. In the video, I show you guys exactly how to do a frequency table, how to get mean and standard deviation, and how to look at splitting scores based on a categorical variable. So based on that, you should be able to complete, whoops, there's our 10-minute warning. You should be able to complete that data analysis in a breeze. But have you guys started it? Any questions I can help answer with it?
I I tried to do it, and when you talk about the relationship between the variables, um, well, I'm sorry, my brain is fogging up right now at this moment. Sometimes if you put the shock value in the top part versus the split box.
Yes. So you have to put the appropriate type of variable in the appropriate box. And so if you look at the top box, depending on the analysis you do, it'll have a little icon next to it for what kind of variables can go in there. You'll see often a little ruler that's for a continuous variable. So for instance, what is your SAT score? That would be a continuous variable because you're getting a number, and you know that 700 is less than 800. There's a meaningful difference between the two. So that is a continuous ratio variable that has the little ruler number. Those are the types of variables that are most helpful to do something like a mean and standard deviation with, right? I want to know out of 100 people, what is my mean? What's the average of their scores and what's the standard deviation so that I know about variability of scores between them? What wouldn't be as helpful is if I did a frequency table of 100 people's SAT scores, right? Then I would have 600, 1, 602, 2, 603, 1. Then it might go down to 610, 4, right? Like that's a massive table I'm going to get. That's not helpful. We use frequency table for categorical or nominal data. So in other words, out of 100 people, how many of you are single, married, divorced, or widowed? And then I have a count. That's way more helpful. Now, doing the mean of marital status, would that make any sense? No, because someone might get a 1, 2, 3, or 4 based on which category they fall into, but mean doesn't make any sense at all. So that's why we use a frequency. So for the shock variable in the assignment, they're either in the shock category or in the no shock category. So that is a categorical variable. So that's something we can split by, or I can do a frequency on. But the mood variable, right, or anger, I think is another variable, that's a score. And so that we would do a mean or standard deviation with. And that whole example is based on Milgram's study. If you guys do a quick search on Milgram, it's a pretty seminal psychological study that was done in the 50s, post World War II, trying to understand the nature of evil, whether there's something specific and unique about Nazis at the time in terms of the horrific things they did. And so part of that is they had somebody in a white coat telling someone, you must shock the person because they got it wrong. You must shock. And because they were told to do it, their
Yeah.
compliance was incredibly high, and they were not actually hurting anyone. It was a Confederate in the other room, but they were getting feedback as if they were hurting them. Anyway, I'm getting in the weeds. It's a phenomenal study. You guys should read up on it if you don't know about it. So the goal of the data analysis assignment for this week is just to do basic descriptive statistics, mean, standard deviation, frequency, and understand how those work. That's the goal.
Thank you.
Yeah, Megan, do you have a question?
Yeah, just about the quiz.
Yeah.
What's it on?
It's on the textbook and the slides.
Okay.
So, and I think you probably guys get this from all your professors. I'm like, I think it's very easy, but I wrote it, so I may be biased. You can take it multiple times. So if you find that your score is not where you want it to be, you can take it again. But, and I warn everyone because every semester this happens, you will not get your score on your short answer immediately because the computer can't grade that. This person's got to grade it, and I'm not getting a message going, oh, Megan's taking the quiz, quick answer. I grade it at the end of the week so that you guys can take it multiple times. So if you see that your score is 5 points short and you're like, how did I do so poorly? It is quite likely just that short answer one.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Any questions, Michelle? I didn't want to cut you off earlier.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I have a question about the assignment because we're supposed to be looking for some kind of an article to support our hypothesis. But I did research the Milgram study, and the thing is, like you said, they didn't actually shock people, right? So I'm not finding articles that tell me anything about, like, if you actually shock somebody, what behavior it changes. The articles are about, like you were talking about, like the compliance, the obedience. So I'm not finding articles that support my hypothesis about shock or no shock.
So I think part of it is you're looking at shock or no shock and how it impacts mood, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And anger. So I think that would be where you go, is what would be the response? And honestly, the best thing for this is think of yourself. If you were in that person's shoe, what would be your reaction? And what is the impact of corporal punishment on mood, right? So you can step out of the study and look more broadly in terms of physical punishment and its effectiveness in improving mood or improving performance, things like that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. And truly, I want us to focus on the important part of the data analysis assignment, which is to practice doing the statistics. The rest, the interpretation of it and being able to put a hypothesis to it, that's to make it holistically and contextually appropriate. The bulk of the points on that assignment is where you're able to do the statistical analysis. So I say this because I don't want you guys to spend hours and hours researching to get the perfect hypothesis, when really my focus is to see, are you guys able to run the stats? Does that help?
It does. I apologize. I have to hop off now. We have a commitment to get to. So.
No worries at all. These are completely optional. And like I said, it'll be saved and I'll send you a link. Yes, no problem. Have a great evening.
Okay.
Bye, Michelle.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Michelle.
Bye.
Yeah, and I think we just have a couple of, we have 2 minutes left before it cuts us off. So any other questions I can help out with?
I think on my end, I'm good. Thank you so much for doing these videos and for all the help with the video for the Jamovi as well.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot more excited after watching the video from yesterday and this and for the course, because it seemed like it was going to be woo.
Well, I will say everyone approaches this course with that kind of fear, and hopefully by the end people tell you, oh, it wasn't that bad. Actually, she's not that mean. It's all nice. It's all good, right? That's certainly the goal. I'm not trying to like shock and awe anyone. But also you guys are just on the heels of your candidacy, which was shock and awe. So I think there's maybe a heightened stress response. Really know that My goal is not to have anyone become a professional statistician after this class. It is to just see how we can bend our thinking quantitatively and dabble a tiny bit with stats so that when we read about it in research articles, we're not like math, la, 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 I don't know what to do with it. You have some semblance of knowledge as to, oh, that's a correlational. Okay, I know that's relationships, right? Just some basic language to go alongside so you better understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
I share what Megan said, that we're getting over our anxiety. So appreciate the therapy that we're going through right now. And I just double checked. I haven't received input back on last week's assignment, either
Oh,
from Sakai
no.
or Outlook.
Okay, I will
So
double check on that right after our meeting here.
thank
Will
you
do.
so much, though. It's very
Yes,
nice to connect.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Roto.
of course. All right, we'll speak again real soon.
Sounds good.
All right.
Have a
Okay,
good day.
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.